Hey, I'm Jacob, and you're listening to Cities in Motion, the podcast for anyone who wants cities built for people. Each week, we dig into the systems, design, and culture that shapes urban life and explore how smarter transportation, better planning, and thoughtful policy can make our communities more livable. Today, we're talking about one of the biggest transportation and civic debates in Central Texas, the future of Interstate 35 through Austin, and what that means for mobility, health, equity, and our urban environment. I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Miriam Schoenfield. Miriam is an associate professor of philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin. She's also the president of Rethink I-35, a volunteer nonprofit challenging the current I-35 expansion plan and advocating for safer, more equitable, and more sustainable mobility solutions for Austin. Miriam and her colleagues are currently involved in litigation and community advocacy aimed for ensuring that environmental and health impacts, especially air and pollution and equity concerns, are fully considered in highway planning. In our conversation, we dig into Rethink I-35's vision, the legal and technical challenges they're facing, the broader implications of highway expansions for cities, and what cities built for people, not just cars, might really look like. Let's get started.
Yep, my name is Miriam Schoenfield. I'm the president of Rethink35. We're an organization that started to fight the expansion of the I-35 highway that cuts right through the middle of downtown. TxDOT has this project proposed to expand it from about 12 to about 20 lanes, and Rethink35 was formed to really put forward an alternative that would be more friendly to the urban environment and repair some of the harms that this highway has caused in the past.
What's some of the history behind going through Austin? My mom always tells these great stories about old Austin, and I was like, what was it like without I-35?
Yeah, so before I-35, there was this beautiful boulevard. It was called East Avenue. It had this big grassy median. And East Avenue actually played a very important role in Austin's racial history. Austin passed the master plan in 1928, and the decision was made that East Avenue would be a racial segregation line. And so communities of color who at that point lived all over Austin were essentially forced to relocate to the east of East Avenue. And then everything east of East Avenue became, the Austin for communities of color, and everything west became white Austin. So in the 50s, when a lot of these segregationist policies became unconstitutional, was around the time the interstate highway system was starting, and then the decision was made to replace East Avenue with I-35. And that was a very intentional decision. It was a way to sort of solidify a barrier to separate East and West Austin.
Okay. What are some of the major effects? Like economically, you said racially, were there any effects that the highway had on Austin?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things about I-35 through Austin is that it's sitting on some of the most valuable land in the entire state. So it has enormous economic potential that is being utterly wasted by it being a highway. Not only is the land itself, which is quite significant, that's used for the highway, being wasted, it depresses all of the land surrounding it. And then, so one of the other big issues with highways that run through the middle of cities, in addition to just like the huge economic opportunities that are wasted, is that it creates a transportation barrier. It makes it very difficult, especially for people walking, biking, or to have an effective public transit system when the east-west crossing is a highway. So it really is a barrier. It's an economic barrier. It's a social barrier. People identify where they live in Austin based on whether they live on the east of I-35 or the west of I-35. So it's continued to affect almost every aspect of living in Austin to this day.
So what was Rethink I-35's I-35?
Our proposal was that the interstate traffic, which is really traffic going from Mexico to Canada, this is an interstate highway meant to take people between states. Our proposal was that the interstate traffic be rerouted around Austin onto existing highways so that that goes around the city, not straight through the middle of the city, and that the roadway that goes straight through the middle of the city be converted into an urban boulevard. So that would include lanes for cars, of course, but also public transit, light rail, bike lanes, vibrant pedestrian environment, shops, restaurants, affordable housing. I mean, there's just so much potential that could be realized in a boulevard of that sort. So, and the other thing to note about an urban boulevard like that is that it has way more people carrying capacity than a highway. A highway is actually an incredibly inefficient way to move large numbers of people around because each person is in a car that takes up a ton of space. So if you're thinking about a city, if you're thinking about density, if you're thinking about a high concentration of population, people trying to get places, a boulevard is just a much more efficient vehicle just for transportation alone.
Yeah, I could definitely relate. I unfortunately drive on the highway every day getting to work, and I have no other way to get to work unless I want to really, 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 really plan ahead. And I think having those boulevards would really increase ridership on public transit, make it easier to walk or bike, or make it easier to live in a city rather than being surrounded by a highway. I mean, it's noisy. There's pollution. From where I am right now, I could hear the highway, and it's making me tense, you know. People say that, expanding the highways like the Katy Freeway in Houston will solve traffic, but obviously in that case it hasn't. What could you tell us about induced demand and in expanding highways?
Yeah. Well, first, let me just echo the point you just made. I can also hear the highway right now. So many people living in the Central Texas region have this experience of having the highway be a soundtrack all the time, and it's not good. And the air pollution as well is a big issue. With respect to congestion, yes. So when these projects are advertised, let's expand the highway. They're advertised as we're going to get rid of the traffic because we're going to have all of this extra space. And so all the cars will flow freely. And there's a sense in which that's very compelling image intuitively. It's like, if a pipe is clogged, you make the pipe bigger and then, it's not clogged anymore. But the problem with highway expansions is this concept that you mentioned called induced demand. What happens when you expand a highway is that you encourage more people to drive, and crucially, you encourage developments that rely on the extra space that was freed up by that highway. So now that there's extra space on the highway, developers think, I might build an employment center or a housing development further away from the city, and people will be able to use this highway to get in and out. And so inevitably, this has happened with pretty much every single highway expansion that's ever occurred. The roadway fills back up or gets worse within 3 to 10 years. And there is robust data on this. It is virtually exceptionless. And you can see that if you look at cities like some of the cities that have the worst traffic in the country, Houston, Los Angeles, they just keep expanding over and over. And you mentioned the Katy Freeway, that's about 26 lanes. So, these highways started like 2 to 4, 4 to 8, and it's just abundantly clear at this point that you cannot build your way out of congestion. What you need in a city is a transportation system that is free of congestion. In other words, that provides people an alternative to sitting in traffic, like public transit, like walking, like biking. So until we actually implement a robust public transit system that can work for all people, all of this highway expansion is going to do nothing to ease our congestion woes.
Yeah, definitely. I'm honestly really, really excited for Project Connect and all the things that's like light rail in Austin. That'll be awesome getting to the airport, hopefully. I went to Vancouver a couple of years ago and it was just amazing. We got to the airport, we took the train from the airport, got to Vancouver, and my wife and I, we didn't drive for almost 2 weeks. We
Yeah.
walked, we took the bus, we took the train, we took a ferry.
Yeah.
It was so great. And I wish every city had something like that. It's not just here's the one option you get and that's it. Like if you want to drive, that's great. It's easier for you if other people have the option to bike or bus or ferry, or maybe not in Austin, maybe not with the ferries, but gondola to work. Um,
Yeah, totally.
yeah.
Totally. And they say sometimes that the cities that are best for drivers are the cities that aren't built for drivers
Mhm.
because, like you just said, most of the people in the city are not using the roadways. And then the people that actually really need to drive because they're carrying heavy stuff, because there's a gazillion reasons someone might need to use a car. That's who the roadway should be for. I actually just read a study the other day that about a fifth of Americans who drive would rather live a car-free lifestyle. And I've heard what you just said from so many people. People go somewhere else and they have a different experience and they think that's cool. We can't have that. Why can't we have that here? I think some of the politicians are under the mistaken impression that everyone loves it the way it is because that's what we have. But in fact, what this study shows is that there's huge unmet demand for car-free or car-light lifestyles. And so, the politicians need to listen to the people and start changing the infrastructure that we're building.
How can we get connected with the politicians?
Well, there's politicians at many levels involved in these decisions. So here in Austin, there's the Austin City Council, of course, and the Travis County Commissioners Court. And those are the local government bodies where this highway is located. Both of those, the city and the county, came out very critical of this project from the state. It was ultimately a decision by the state government to build this highway. And that's one of the things that we've come to realize through this fight is that it's a real problem that cities don't have control over the projects that happen within their city limits. Like Austin is trying to, build light rail, like you said. Austin is trying to build a different kind of transportation system, but the state just didn't care that this was completely antithetical to the city's vision. But another really interesting body that's involved in these decisions, which is often overlooked, is the regional government, which in our case is called CAMPO, which stands for the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. And CAMPO is governed by a 22-person board, which contains mostly elected officials from the city of Austin, from Travis County, but also from Buda, from Kyle, from Maynard, from all the different, smaller cities around Austin. And that body actually has a lot of power. They're the ones that decide how all the federal funding that comes into the Austin area gets allocated to projects. So they were very involved in the I-35 as well. And one of the things, again, we've learned through this fight is that there are a lot of issues about the way project selection happens at CAMPO. And that's one of the things that we're continuing to work on.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Well, obviously, construction has already started, and I can see it every day, and it's not great to look at either.
Yeah.
I mean, what can we do now? What is Rethink I-35's involvement now that construction has already started?
It's very hard. It's very hard. It's a hard question. It's hard to watch. I also see it every day, and it's kind of heartbreaking. We have filed a lawsuit and a civil rights complaint. The lawsuit received a hearing, and that was a couple months ago, and we are waiting on a verdict. That lawsuit was based on a violation of NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, which we were basically claiming that TxDOT failed to study the air quality impacts of this project. Travis County is already above the threshold considered safe for one of the major pollutants, soot pollution or particulate matter that can clog up people's lungs and cause asthma. And TxDOT didn't do the studies that would be required to see how this project would impact our air. So that was what our lawsuit was based on, and we are still waiting on a verdict from that. I don't want to give people false hope and say that we're super optimistic, but that is still up in the air. And then the civil rights complaint that really emphasized also the air quality inequities that East and West Austin have faced and how this project exacerbates health disparities that TxDOT acknowledged exist as a result of this highway. That has also yet to be resolved. So we're still using all of the levers available to us, but construction has already started. And so a lot of our work right now is really focused on, well, first, there's a bunch of other highway expansions being proposed in Austin. So we're working on fighting those, but also really looking at the systemic issues that resulted in this project happening at the state level, at CAMPO, and working on how can we use this momentum that was created around I-5 and all of the organizing that's been done around this project. How can we channel that to improve the systems in place so that we get better transportation decisions made in the future?
I wasn't aware of all these different levels of government. Obviously, there's state and the city of Austin. I didn't know about Campo at all. That's really, really interesting. I did hear about the lawsuit and civil right complaint that you guys did, and it seems very obvious that, of course, there's particulate matter and pollution surrounding the highway. How does TxDOT and the city of Austin react when these complaints get filed? Do they hear about it as soon as it happens, or do they wait until it gets more official?
Well, so nothing about our lawsuit, until the lawsuit is resolved, TxDOT doesn't have to stop doing what it's doing. So once they basically got permission from the federal government to start the project once they finished what's called the final environmental impact statement. But we couldn't sue either until that statement was released. So it's taken time, all of the legal proceedings involved. So TxDOT has the freedom to continue to build while this lawsuit is playing out. But was your question more about how do they respond to the legal complaint?
Yes.
So we're actually in a very interesting situation here in Travis County, which is what made the lawsuit a complex one. So I mentioned that our air quality levels are above the threshold considered safe by the EPA. Nonetheless, we have still not been designated by the EPA as being in what's called non-attainment. The reason for that is multifold. Some of it has to do with the stuff going on right now in Washington and how the EPA is changing things. But it also just takes a few years between the time when you pass the threshold and you get that designation. So TxDOT is saying we didn't need to do the air quality studies because we're in attainment. And we said, well, yes, we are, but that's just because the clock hasn't, finished counting the number of years from when we surpassed that threshold. And your job as an agency is to study how this project is going to impact whether we're in attainment. And it's clearly going to make things worse given that we're already over the threshold. Anyway, that was their argument. Their argument is Travis County's in attainment, so we don't have to do air quality studies. It's a bad argument.
How can people get involved with Rethink 35? And do you recommend any other nonprofits, organizations to get involved with?
Well, I'd really encourage everyone to go to our website, rethink35.org. You can sign up for our newsletter there to get updates. There's also a petition there about the 183 project, which we won't get into here, but is a really problematic other highway expansion that TxDOT is planning in the area. So both of those are on our website. Rethink 35 is also a member of the Texas Streets Coalition, which is a coalition of organizations like ours that exist across the state that are really working on improving the state level legislation surrounding transportation decisions. So for example, Texas has this absurd thing where it's baked into the Constitution that about 97% of our transportation money has to go to roadways. So, there's a lot of work to be done at the state level to basically free up transportation funding so we can use it for transit, for safety, for the many desperately needed transportation projects in this state that are not highways.
I recently saw the TxDOT article where they admitted to oh, Texas is actually overridden by cars. We need to build more transit. Did you see that also?
Yes, and I really want to give TxDOT kudos and the TxDOT staff who worked on this plan kudos. It is amazing. It just came out, and I think it's the most exciting thing that TxDOT has released, I don't know, maybe ever. It's called the Statewide Multimodal Transportation Plan. And in that plan, they acknowledge, look, increasingly people are living in cities. You just can't move everyone around in an efficient manner in a city. We need alternatives. We just can't have a sustainable transportation system where every single person is taking every single trip by car. And so they really had this very bold visionary plan of actually bringing public transit to the state. So we were so excited about it. The challenge is that this plan, these projects, well, two things. One is that these projects need money, and the plan itself doesn't contain how they're going to get money because, as I mentioned, it's baked into the Texas Constitution that you really can't use the transportation money for transit. So that's one of the things that has to change on the legislative level for this plan to get any legs. And then, of course, we have to just stop spending all the money on the highways so that we can use it for some of these better projects.
How much does it cost to build a highway, maintain it for 10, 20, 30 years compared to building a light rail like they plan on doing?
It's hard to make like exact
Yeah.
comparisons because of, how many miles each one does. I know that the I-35 expansion, if you include the north, south, and central projects, is something like over $8 billion. So, and that doesn't include the cost of maintenance, which is significant. And I actually think that's one of the things that's been motivating like this Texas multimodal plan from TxDOT is the recognition that we've been building all of these highways, and there's not really a plan for funding to maintain them all. It's an enormous expense, and this is something that we're going to see increasingly going forward, the drain on the state of maintaining all of these highways that have been built. So it is a real financial challenge.
Well, we have a few minutes left. Do you want to tell people how people can find you online or recommend any Rethink I-35 websites, accounts, any of that?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, our website is rethink35.org. You can sign up for our newsletter there. You can sign a petition about 183. We're also on all of the social media, so you can find us on Blue Sky, Instagram, Twitter, etc. The other thing I would just recommend is there's a great book that came out on this whole subject by Megan Kimball called City Limits, and it's about the sort of highway system overall in this country, but with a lot of focus on Texas and specifically also the Austin I-35 project. So it's a great book. It's a really fun, easy read. So if anyone's interested in the subject, I'd highly recommend that book.
I will listen to it on my commute.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for meeting with me, and I hope to talk to you later and looking forward to hearing more about Rethink I-35.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to Cities in Motion. And a big thank you to Dr. Miriam Schoenfield for sharing her insight into the future of I-35 and what people-centered mobility could look like in Austin. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like the podcast, share it with your friends, and subscribe to catch new episodes every Friday. It helps more people find these conversations. I'm Jacob, and this has been Cities in Motion.